The day Adam rolled back into town was one I'll never forget. The air felt heavier somehow, as if it carried the weight of unanswered questions and unfinished chapters. My first reaction was disbelief, swiftly followed by a rush of emotions. I struggled to contain anger, betrayal, and an unexpected pang of longing. It was as though the years of carefully constructed distance between us had been ripped apart in an instant, leaving me raw and exposed. For 8 years, I had managed to keep him as a memory relegated to the past, and now, with his sudden return, the delicate balance of my rebuilt life teetered on the edge of collapse. It was late in the evening, and the golden hues of the sunset painted the streets I'd come to know like the back of my hand. I was at the office, wrapping up another long day when a buzz of whispers rippled through the building. Someone had seen him, the ghost of my past, walking through town with a pregnant woman by his side. I kept my composure, even as my heart raced. The news of Adam's return had hit me like a thunderbolt the night before. After 8 long years of wondering, hoping, and finally giving up, the thought of him resurfacing had seemed like a cruel joke. 1,000 furious thoughts had stormed through my mind. Where had he been? Why had he stayed away? And most importantly, how dare he come back now, when I had painstakingly rebuilt my life? That evening, he showed up at the office wearing a sharp navy blue suit that fit him like it had been tailored yesterday. The crisp white shirt beneath the jacket was perfectly pressed, and his tie, a deep burgundy, added a pop of color that demanded attention. His dark hair was neatly combed back, with just a hint of gray at the temples that made him look more distinguished than the brash young man I remembered. His expression was a mix of determination and arrogance, with piercing eyes that scanned the room as though he already owned it. There was an undeniable confidence in his stride, the kind that came from years of navigating the world on his own terms. With him stood a heavily pregnant woman, her slender frame swathed in a flowing emerald green dress that accentuated her rounded belly. The dress had a high neckline and long sleeves, elegant but modest, with delicate gold embroidery tracing the cuffs and hem. Her dark hair was styled into a neat bun, with a few wisps escaping to frame her face. She wore minimal makeup, just enough to highlight her soft features, but her tired eyes betrayed a hint of unease. Despite this, she clung to Adam with a quiet determination, her hand resting lightly on his arm as though drawing strength from him. There was a subtle tension in her posture, as if she were bracing herself for the unknown. Seeing him, after all, these years sent a storm of emotions rushing through me. My chest tightened and I felt an ache I hadn't anticipated, a mix of anger, betrayal, and something I didn't want to name. How dare he walk in like this, as though time hadn't passed, as though he hadn't abandoned me to deal with the wreckage of our lives? I clenched my fists under the desk, willing myself to stay composed, to not let him see the turmoil he'd stirred within me. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm, the arrogance unmistakable. I have so many questions in my mind. By looking at him, I want to ask where he has been all these years, what happened to him, and more. But after his deep voice pierced my ears, I came to my senses. To not make a fuss, I didn't miss a beat. "Make an appointment," I replied coolly, turning away before he could see the flicker of emotions I fought to suppress. But Adam, shameless and persistent as ever, ignored my dismissal. He followed me into my office anyway, his audacity sending a fresh wave of irritation through me. The startled looks from my employees burned in my peripheral vision, but I kept walking, refusing to let him see how much his presence unnerved me. "I want a divorce," he blurted, slamming the door behind him. I froze, then let out a bitter laugh. "A divorce? Adam, you're 8 years too late. Legally, you're dead." His confusion was evident, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered the pain he'd caused, the years I'd spent picking up the pieces of the life he'd shattered. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice cracking. The pregnant woman from earlier followed Adam slowly into the room, her movements hesitant but deliberate, as if gathering courage with each step. Her large, tear-filled eyes darted between Adam and me, her face pale and anxious. As the heated argument unfolded, she suddenly broke down, her voice trembling with a mix of desperation and sorrow. If Sister Sandra doesn't want to divorce. Adam, what will happen to my unborn child? She cried, her words piercing through the charged atmosphere. Tears streamed down her face, and she clutched her stomach protectively. Her fragility was palpable, yet it was her unwavering voice that revealed a quiet strength beneath the surface. Her plea seemed to snap Adam into action. He immediately moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders with a protective fierceness. His eyes locked onto mine, blazing with anger and indignation. How can you be so cruel? Emma is pregnant with my child. I want to give this child a proper home, Sandra. His accusations hit me like a slap, the audacity of his words momentarily rendering me speechless. My heart pounded in my chest as I leaned back against my desk, folding my arms tightly to keep from shaking. I fought to keep my composure even as a storm of emotions swirled within me. Shock at his shamelessness, anger at his gall, and a deep gnawing ache that I didn't dare name. I said, "What does it have to do with me?" I leaned against my desk, crossing my arms, my face cold and expressionless despite the storm brewing inside me. Furious thoughts swirled in my mind. What right did he have to ask for anything after disappearing for 8 long years? It was as if he thought he could waltz back into my life and pick up where he left off, as though his absence had been a mere fleeting moment. You vanished, Adam. No contact, no explanation. After 7 years, the courts declared you dead. And now, out of nowhere, you come here and demand I divorce you. Adam and I met through mutual friends, Greg and Lisa, who were convinced we would be perfect for each other. I still remember that evening vividly. A casual dinner at their place where Adam's easy charm and infectious laughter immediately caught my attention. Sandra, meet Adam, Greg had said, clapping Adam on the shoulder. He's got big dreams, just like you. During the first 6 months of dating, Adam seemed every bit the gentleman. He showered me with thoughtful gestures, surprise, flowers at work, handwritten notes left on my doorstep, and hours-long conversations about our future aspirations. He was attentive, ambitious, and seemingly genuine. My friends were smitten with him too, constantly singing his praises and reminding me how lucky I was. When he proposed, it was nothing short of grand. He organized a surprise dinner at an upscale restaurant, inviting all our mutual friends. As the dessert arrived, he got down on one knee, holding out a sparkling diamond ring. Sandra, he began, his voice steady but emotional, you are everything I've ever wanted and more. I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me? The applause and cheers from everyone around us left me overwhelmed, and in that moment, there was no way I could have said no. What I didn't realize at the time was how much Greg and Lisa had played a role in orchestrating everything. I later learned they had spent weeks convincing Adam that I was not just a good match, but also someone who could bring stability and support to his life. She's smart, driven, and has a heart of gold, Lisa had told him. You'd be a fool not to see what's right in front of you. Their intentions might have been well-meaning, but looking back, I can't help but wonder if their words had planted the idea that I was more than a partner, that I was a solution to his problems. At the time, I had a stable job while he was still in the early stages of building his business. In the beginning, he seemed like the ideal husband, charming, attentive, and supportive. But after marriage, the facade began to crumble. At first, I thought the changes in our relationship were simply the natural adjustments of marriage, the kind of growing pains every couple experiences. But over time, it became clear that wasn't the case. His true colors emerged in subtle but jarring ways. His dismissiveness of my career, his reckless decisions, and his subtle attempts to manipulate me into investing my life savings into his business. He would often hint with an air of superiority that a woman's primary role was to support her husband and family, not to pursue her own ambitions. Sandra, a man's business is his legacy, he'd say, his tone tinged with patronizing affection. Your career is nice, but it'll never hold the same importance. Don't you want to secure our future? Each word felt like a calculated blow, chipping away at my sense of independence and worth. These moments left me torn between anger and doubt, wondering if I was being selfish for wanting more than the role he seemed determined to confine me to. Because of this, we started to quarrel more frequently. These arguments, often initiated by his dismissive comments about my career or his demands for financial support, left me feeling cornered and undervalued. "Sandra, you're overreacting." "Again," Adam slurred, his words thick with the unmistakable edge of alcohol. He swayed unsteadily, his tie askew and his shirt rumpled, as if the day had battered him before the alcohol finished the job. The sharp smell of whiskey clung to him, making Sandra recoil slightly. "Overreacting?" she snapped, her voice trembling with frustration and hurt. "You took the last bit of money from my purse, Adam. That was for the utility bill." Adam waved a dismissive hand, staggering toward the couch. "I needed it for a client meet and greet," he mumbled, slumping down and fumbling with his shoes. Sandra's jaw tightened as tears pricked her eyes. "And how are we supposed to pay the bills now?" she demanded, her voice rising. He glanced at her, irritation flaring in his eyes. "You look after it," he muttered, before stretching out and closing his eyes. The dismissal stung worse than any insult. As Adam blacked out on the sofa, Sandra sank onto a nearby chair, her shoulders shaking as the tears she'd been holding back finally spilled. How could he come home like this, drunk and disheveled, with no regard for anyone but himself? He would say, his tone filled with exasperation, as though my concerns were mere inconveniences. "Why can't you just trust me? I'm doing this for us," he said, his tone dripping with exasperation. But his words felt as empty as the promises he once made. Each confrontation seemed like another brick in the wall that was steadily growing between us, isolating us from our own frustrations and unresolved grievances. What made it worse was his mother. A tall, imposing woman with sharp features and piercing eyes, she exuded a strict and traditional air that was hard to ignore. Her graying hair was always tied back into a severe bun, and she wore a modest yet meticulously maintained dress, adorned with chunky gold jewelry that glinted with every movement, a clear display of her pride and greed. Her expression often carried a judgmental edge, and she had a way of looking down at others, as though they were constantly falling short of her expectations. She embodied an orthodox mindset, firmly rooted in the belief that a woman's place was in the home, serving her husband and family. Every word she spoke dripped with an air of authority, leaving little room for disagreement. "You should be grateful your husband is a great man. He's just stressed," she would declare, her tone a mix of reproach and condescension. "How can a man show his face if he doesn't have money in his pockets? You need to cut him some slack for now. Once he succeeds, you just have to rest and take care of the children. Or better yet," she added with a sly glint in her eyes, "you can bear my grandchild first so that he becomes more responsible." She had a knack for emotional manipulation, always finding ways to excuse his behavior. A good wife supports her husband no matter what. She would pressure me relentlessly, often guilt-tripping me into helping Adam financially and emotionally, even when it meant sacrificing my own needs. Whenever I wore makeup or a new dress to the office and my mother-in-law happened to visit, her comments would cut through me like a blade. "Who are you dressing up for?" she'd demand, her tone a mix of accusation and disdain. "You should focus on getting pregnant and taking care of my son. If you have this much money for your extravagance, why not help your husband, huh?" The words would hang in the air, heavy with judgment and designed to diminish. She'd glare at me, her piercing eyes daring me to argue as if my only value lay in fulfilling her outdated expectations. Those moments left me seething with frustration, feeling like my identity was being erased piece by piece. But confronting her would only invite more hostility, so I bottled up my emotions and plastered on a polite smile, all while silently screaming inside. I remember one particular conversation vividly. She cornered me in the kitchen one evening, after another of Adam's outbursts. "Sandra," she said, her tone sweet but laced with an edge, "if you don't stand by Adam, who will? Marriage is about compromise, dear. You must be patient." I wanted to scream, to tell her that patience wasn't the issue, respect was. But I bit my tongue, swallowing the frustration and resentment building inside me. Over time, her words and Adam's actions eroded the trust and love I had once felt, leaving me questioning everything about the life I had chosen. Reluctantly, I gave in to their demands and handed over my hard-earned savings to Adam. For a brief period, he transformed into the attentive, charming husband I had once believed him to be. His mother, too, softened her sharp tone, though her relentless nagging about wanting a grandchild continued unabated. Soon, however, my mother-in-law began visiting me more frequently, always asking for money under the guise of covering her personal expenses. Meanwhile, Adam's presence at home became increasingly scarce, his absences growing longer and more frequent. On one rare occasion, when she appeared to show some semblance of understanding, my mother-in-law remarked, "Sandra, you've been so patient and giving," she said, her tone both placating and insincere, as though trying to mask her own complicity. Her sharp eyes scanned me critically, and her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Adam is lucky to have you," she added, her voice tinged with an edge that made the words feel more like a reprimand than a compliment. "He just needs a little more time." Her words, meant to placate, only deepened the ache of my sacrifices. One day, that ominous call came, shattering the tranquility of my afternoon. A gruff voice, laced with an unsettling gravity, rasped, "Is this Sandra?" I answered calmly, "Yes, this is Sandra here," though a flicker of unease already danced in the pit of my stomach. "Ma'am, I'm calling from the police station. We found a car near the riverside. The number plate is registered under Adam." The words hung in the air, each syllable heavy with unspoken dread. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the panic rising in my throat. "Is Adam safe?" I choked out, the question desperate, raw. The officer's voice, though professional, couldn't entirely mask the grim undercurrent. "We don't know, ma'am. We only found the car. No one was near it. We searched the river, fearing the worst. A possible suicide? But we couldn't find anybody." The world tilted on its axis. A chilling wave of nausea washed over me. I'm coming. Please share the location." My voice trembled, barely a whisper. "Sure, ma'am," the officer replied, his voice a somber counterpoint to the escalating terror within me. As I hung up, the phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the floor. The news, stark and brutal, had shattered the calm of my day, leaving behind a gaping void of fear and uncertainty. Where was Adam? Was he hurt? Was he gone? The questions spiraled, each one a fresh stab of agony. My mind raced, conjuring up horrifying images, each more terrifying than the last. The riverside, the empty car, the chilling search for a body. The fear, cold and suffocating, threatened to consume me. That was the last day of that chapter for me. David entered the office, his brow furrowed in concern. My heart skipped a beat. Even after all this time, his presence still had that effect on me. He looked so David. Jawline as sharp as a chisel, eyes the color of a stormy sea, that familiar air of quiet confidence momentarily replaced by worry. "Is there an issue, babe?" His voice, deep and resonant with a hint of a southern drawl, rumbled across the room. His eyes, filled with a tender love that always made my breath catch, searched my face. His hand, roughened by years of honest work, settled naturally on my waist, a possessive, comforting gesture. I nodded, forcing a calm smile. "No," I said, my voice firm, resolute. "I've moved on," I declared, the words aimed squarely at Adam, who stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief. "We got married 2 years ago," I added, my voice softening slightly. David's eyes, filled with a proud, possessive glint, met mine. The look on his face was one I'd never forget. A mix of disbelief, regret, and heartbreak so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. It was like watching a part of him shatter, leaving behind a hollow shell. He sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping under the weight of my words, the arrogance that usually clung to him like a second skin completely stripped away. "And what?" "About my mother?" he finally asked, his voice a mere whisper, the bravado gone, replaced by a vulnerability I had never seen before. Then a wave of frustration washed over him. "Why haven't you waited for me?" he demanded, his voice rising. I stared at him, disbelief clouding my vision. "Do you have the right to ask me that?" I retorted, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "After you disappeared without a trace? After the news of your disappearance sent your mother into a tailspin? plunging her into the depths of despair. She's in a mental asylum now, Adam, a prisoner of your silence, your selfish abandonment. The weeks that followed Adam's return were a whirlwind of chaos. He materialized at my office, his presence a jarring intrusion into the carefully constructed order of my life. His demands, his attempts to reassert claims on my life and the business, felt like a tidal wave, threatening to wash away all the progress I had made. The once vibrant man I had known seemed to have withered, replaced by a shadow of his former self, haunted by regret and consumed by a downward spiral of self-destruction. His arrogance, once a captivating force, had morphed into a desperate clinging to the past, a pathetic attempt to recapture a life that had long since slipped away. He would appear unannounced, his eyes hollow and filled with a mixture of resentment and self-pity. He'd launch into rambling accusations, blaming me for his failures, for the unraveling of his life, oblivious to the pain he inflicted with every word. He spoke of betrayal, of a life stolen from him, oblivious to the fact that he had betrayed himself and the trust of others. His visits became more frequent and more erratic. He would linger outside my office, his presence a constant shadow, a chilling reminder of the man I once loved. The fear that he would disrupt my life, that he would try to sabotage the business I had worked so hard to build, gnawed at me constantly. I slept fitfully, haunted by nightmares of his return, of his desperate pleas, of the chaos he threatened to unleash. Then came the news of his arrest for fraud. A strange sense of detachment washed over me. Disappointed, perhaps, but not surprised. His actions, while reprehensible, seemed to confirm the man he had become. The arrogance had given way to desperation, the ambition to a reckless pursuit of self-gratification. He had crossed a line, and the consequences, while inevitable still, felt like a tragic fall from grace. Before his sentencing, Adam requested a meeting with me. He appeared broken, the arrogance replaced by a weary acceptance of his fate. In that meeting, he finally confessed, acknowledging the pain he had caused and the damage he had inflicted. He spoke of his regret, his remorse, and the crushing weight of his actions. He revealed that he had resorted to fraud to provide for his pregnant girlfriend, desperate to secure a future for their child. However, his efforts had been in vain, as she had left him for an older, wealthier man, shattering his hopes and dreams. The betrayal, coupled with the weight of his crimes, had pushed him to the brink. Testifying against him in court was one of the most agonizing experiences of my life. My heart ached as I recounted the events, not out of malice, but out of necessity. The business, our livelihood, was at stake. More importantly, so was the safety and well-being of my family. The courtroom, with its sterile atmosphere and the cold, judgmental eyes of strangers, felt like a suffocating chamber. I sat on the witness stand, my voice trembling as I described his actions, his lies, the devastation he had caused. The memory of his pleading eyes and his desperate attempts to manipulate the situation haunted me. I felt a profound sense of sadness, not for him, but for the man he once was, for the potential that had been squandered, for the life that had been irrevocably altered. David, my unwavering support system, stood by me every step of the way. He held my hand, his eyes conveying a silent message of strength and unwavering support. He listened patiently to my anxieties, offering words of comfort and encouragement. He reminded me of our resilience, of the strength we had found together. Life, as it always does, found a way to move forward. I focused on raising Carol, our daughter, a radiant reminder of the joy and love that filled my life. I poured my energy into ensuring the continued success of the business, finding solace in the rhythm of work and the satisfaction of building something meaningful. I immersed myself in my work, finding a sense of purpose and accomplishment in each small victory. Occasionally, the ghost of Adam would flicker into my mind, a fleeting memory, a half-forgotten song. I would remember his laughter, his passion, the way his eyes would sparkle when he spoke of his dreams. But these thoughts no longer carried the weight of anger or longing. They were simply echoes of a past that had shaped me, honed my resilience, and taught me the invaluable lesson of self-worth. When news of his release from prison reached me, I felt a sense of quiet relief. There was no need for contact, no need for closure. My life was full, my heart at peace. I wished him well in silence, hoping he had finally found a path towards redemption. For me, the future was clear. A life built on strength, resilience, and the unwavering love and support of the family I had chosen, a family that had shown me the true meaning of happiness and fulfillment. I learned to appreciate the quiet moments and the simple joys of everyday life, the laughter of my daughter, the warmth of the sun on my face, and the comforting presence of my husband by my side. I rediscovered the power of forgiveness, not for him, but for myself, for the pain I had endured, for the life I had to rebuild. The past, with all its shadows and regrets, could no longer define me. I had emerged from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. I had learned to embrace the present, to cherish the love and support of those who truly mattered, and to build a future filled with hope, joy, and an unwavering belief in my own strength and resilience. If you like this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories like these only at StoryTimes.